Hello folks, welcome back to World War II TV, and a quick reminder, I'm not doing anything on my channel for the next few days, but I will be on the history of the Second World War, every day in the Second World War with Eddie and Joe tomorrow. The link is on my YouTube, blah, blah, community page. Anyway, joining the ranks of some excellent SAS historians on World War II TV is Stephen Davies, but perhaps uniquely is that he doesn't just write about the subject, he is part of a very strong and active living historian group. He is very respected in that regard, and he goes out and shares with people the details of the uniforms, the equipment, the weapons, the vehicles. So he's got sort of two ways of looking at this history. So I'll bring him in now. Good evening, Steve. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you, Woody. Appreciate the invite. It's a little bit nervous actually, because I know that a lot of people watch this, so I'm quite excited, and I feel really honoured to be invited.
Well, it's good to be here, and I'll hold up my copy of your book that you kindly sent me, and the link to the purchasing the book is in the description below. And we were just saying before going live, and then we'll bring up your presentation. I can tell when reading this, you have been bumping along forest tracks in a Jeep. You have, had to handle fast turning corners and stuff. Okay, living history doesn't bring the same dangers as actually being in combat in World War II, but a little bit of the understanding of moving about in a Jeep with lots of gear. And we'll get into that living history aspect as well as the history itself. But Operations Hardy and Wallace, part of France. I'll bring up your slides. So folks, you know what the score is. If you want to leave a question, please pop it in the sidebar there. But I'm going to hand over to Steve to take us through this. And one of the many sort of operations that kind of start as one, then morph into something else, and morph into something else that is sort of the nature of special forces in 44. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Woody. Well, yes, you mentioned it in the sort of green room, should we say, at the start, that there's a fair chunk of authors: Damien Lewis, Gavin Mortimer. Tony Rushmore has been here, of course. All fantastic authors. They come from, dare I say, a much more educated background than I. I've definitely come into this through the living history sort of circuit, and it's really become my pet project. And it's just because it's operations we cover as a living history group in lay parachutistes. It became a sort of fascination, really. Of course, a couple of years ago, when I started really delving into this, we've all heard and seen what happened with the SAS in North Africa. But very little is known, should we say, about what happened in Northwest Europe. And when I heard Operations Wallace and Hardy, I have to admit, I didn't know what operations they were to begin with. And it's very much a case of I needed to start digging and find out more, because I'd read fantastic books by Damien Lewis, and Band of Brothers is my favourite one. And I'd never heard these operations, and indeed 2 SAS as well. So it's nice to have the opportunity to share this with your listeners.
Brilliant stuff. So over to you then.
Excellent. Well, right, we'll dive straight into it, really. I was very lucky because I had access to the SAS War Diary, some fantastic audio reels, interviews, and the first-hand accounts. And it didn't start off as a book. It started off very much as a sort of way of collating all the information for new members and some of the older members of the group to find out about the operations. But it very quickly became apparent there was enough for a book, and the information we sort of gleaned from the archives was absolutely fantastic. And I'll kind of kick this off really with a quote which comes directly from the SAS War Diary, and I'll read this out, and this sort of sets the scene for how the operations would pan out without being too much of a spoiler. So it says, and I quote, "This operation was the most successful of any hitherto undertaken in France by the 2nd SAS Regiment, largely because the whole thing happened to be opportune." Now, there's a little bit of a background in France in 44. Of course, you heard of Operations Houndsworth and Bullbasket. Wallace was going to be a very different operation. This was going to be a Jeep-borne operation. But we'll go into the gubbins of that shortly. And I'll roll on to the next slide. So there's a photo of me in my living history rig as a trooper from 2 SAS. And the photo on the left is the original operational map, which depicts Operation Hardy and Roby, which is another operation that's kind of birthed out of Wallace and Hardy. That photo is from the original report, which is held at the archives. And it just came really to be an absolute treasure trove. Once you start opening these archives, you find out more and more. And it was really exciting. It was a real pleasure to open those documents. Dare I say, probably one of the first people this century looking sort of some of the papers. The last time it being taken out was in the 90s. So I was quite lucky to have a look at that. The whole book, it follows the exact same pattern as the SAS War Diary does. So we're not jumping from start to finish or anywhere in betwixt. It's very much a case of it follows the exact same chapter layout as the War Diary. It's not just a mimic of the War Diary. We've got those first-hand accounts coming in, the audio interviews, and some of the information that's not actually included in the War Diary, miraculously enough as well. But we'll roll on to the next slide. So this really is an overview of course, France. And in red, you will see marked a place called the Balfour Gap. Now, we have to paint the picture. We are looking late July 44. So this is sort of 7 weeks or so, give or take, after the D-Day invasion. So we're right on the German border there. Why is the Balfour Gap so pivotal? Well, it's a natural geographical choke point. It's sandwiched directly between the Vosges mountain range and the Jura mountains. And it was believed as early as February 1944 that this would be one of the main routes back for retreating German forces back into Germany from southern France. And indeed, that is how it played out. Now, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, or SHAEF as we can refer it to, their documents lay out that a town called Châtillon-sur-Seine, and it's probably a good point for me to say I don't speak French at this point. So
that was pretty good pronunciation. Well, that was all right. That was good.
Well, thank you. For a Birmingham lad, that's not too bad. Yes, a little town called Châtillon-sur-Seine is identified by intelligence as being ripe for an operation by the SAS, largely because the Maquis is deemed to be very well organised. And I'll repeat that for later in the story. Very well organised Maquis in Châtillon-sur-Seine, apparently. It doesn't play out that way. So this location is pointed out as being absolutely superb for an SAS operation. So that Balfour Gap is the ultimate end goal for where Hardy and Wallace will have joined up, and that's where they're going to essentially be a thorn in the retreating, in the side of the retreating German forces. That's their whole point, to provide as much harassment as possible to those.
I have to say, Steve, one of the things I was a bit surprised about with the book, although I had read a bit before, was I'd kind of forgotten that it was about cutting off Germans going backwards, not going forwards, because there's that idea that there's lots of things, the Jedburgh teams, things like that, and SOE doing their stuff ahead of D-Day to stop German reinforcements getting to Normandy. But we don't tend to think about the kind of catching people in a kind of like the Falaise Gap kind of thing, I suppose, is hindering them getting out as well. It's a different way of looking at it, but equally interesting and still involving stopping Germans, but the direction is different.
It's a really good point. I'm glad you've made it, because when we think of those typical operations like Operation Gain, Operation Ball Basket is probably the go-to one that most listeners, I should think, would have heard of. That's for Ball Basket is stopping those forces from southwestern France moving up to Normandy, whereas it's really the complete flip side with Hardy and Wallace. So yeah, as you rightfully point out, it's unique in that sense, and it's probably a good point as well to make that when Hardy and Wallace go into the operation goes into being, there is several other operations all playing out with similar sort of outcomes all across France. It's it's not just limited to a handful of operations. We'll roll on to the next slide. So a big part of the research was we had this huge, really lucky, we had this huge pool of photographs that we could draw on. The troublesome part was really identifying them. And we largely achieved that by identifying some of the chaps in the photos and marrying them up through ones that were confirmed to have been on Operation Wallace. Now, this photo, we can't obviously say for certain, being fair, but it's highly likely this photo, in the absence of guns being on the vehicles, was taken at some point immediately before Operation Wallace deployed to France. And we know this is highly likely to be an Operation Wallace photo due to the modifications on the Jeeps, but also the chap sat behind the driver's seat in the rear. He pops up in a later photo as well. His name escapes me. I should have made some notes, but it's a great way to start identifying who's who in that sense. It's also worth noting here, one of the questions we always get asked as living historians: why are you wearing a maroon beret when we're at events? And you kind of think, oh, here we go again. But it's a really good point. People who pick up on it say, you're wearing a maroon beret with an SAS cap badge. What's that all about? Shouldn't it be a sun beret? Well, you'll see in the photo here, the guys are arguably wearing two different types. There's probably the newer chaps on the left wearing the maroon. And then on the right-hand side, the more seasoned hands, shall we say, wearing a sun beret, just judging by the colour. And that's down to the SAS. The reason is for them, at this point in the war, falling under the command of the Army Air Corps. Right, we'll slide on a little bit further. So, Operation Hardy. 26th of July 1944, it comes into being. Now, Operation Hardy is initially 9 men. They are being dropped along with their jeeps. So 3 jeeps, 9 men are dropping onto the operational base of Operation Houndsworth. And this is in the Morvan in southeastern France, mid-southeastern France, under the command of Captain Grant Hibbert. Now, they're one of the first 2 SAS operations to go into the field. Why is there such a gap between beginning of June, D-Day, and the end of July? Well, this is because 2 SAS were explicitly kept in reserve. Of course, who knows what's going to happen with the invasion of Normandy in a nutshell. It's always never a good plan to maroon your forces hundreds of miles behind the lines if you don't know how it's going to play out. Whereas by the end of June, they deemed it suitable and appropriate for the operation to come into being. So Hibbert, along with 8 other men, with 3 jeeps, they drop onto the Houndsworth base on the evening of the 26th of July. Now, Hibbert ends up not jumping onto the original drop location for Houndsworth and ends up dropping roughly sort of 20 miles north on another on Reg Seeking's operational base of Houndsworth, a satellite base further to the north. But the point of Operation Hardy, the whole reason they're going into being with such a small force, is they are the advance guard. So they're going to be entering the field and they're going to be forming an operational base that's nice and secure. They're going to be gathering intelligence. They're going to be primarily stockpiling as many supplies as possible, whether it be fuel, ammunition, explosives, food, and so forth. But one of the big objectives that any SAS operation has at this point in France is to link up with the local Maquis and to galvanise them, to train them in some cases, but to make them as effective as possible. There is a lot of suspicion between the SAS and the Maquis, which is highly warranted, to be fair. But that is their primary case is to, the point of being in the field is for them to stockpile all this ammunition, fuel, rations, etc., anticipating the arrival of the main Operation Wallace body.
And it's worth reminding ourselves, Steve, that you know, I know this is the SAS, but all through the previous couple of years, SOE, French resistant networks are being broken by Germans and Abwehr agents all the time. So it completely makes sense to sort of drip your force in bit by bit as each stage works okay. Then the next lot, because if you were to suddenly, you know, airport in 800 men or something, and then the Germans knew about it, encircled them, you end up, you know, it would be a disaster. So I can understand perfectly why there's this. Don't trust everything on the ground. Don't trust the intel perfectly, and just gradually feed people in. And that's, you know, that seems to be how it works, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that plays into the whole argument that Bill Sterling has in early '44, where the initial proposal, of course, was, I know we've seen it. Dare I mention it on Rogue Heroes? We'll park that. But you see this sort of argument blow up between Sterling and Army Command, who say we're going to drop the SAS en masse as a screening force. It would have been a really foolish thing to do, and you know, to just drip feed those operations into being. Small amounts of men being as hard as possible to track, but causing maximum havoc. It was worth its weight in gold, as of course we will find out. We'll roll on. So this gives a little bit of an idea of where the Morvan is. So this is the 1 SAS Operation Houndsworth area, and this is where Operation Hardy parachute onto. So this is roughly southeast of Châtillon-sur-Seine, but almost directly west of the Balfour Gap, which is where Hardy and Wallace are sort of ultimately aiming for. That's where they're heading for. And dropping onto the Houndsworth base makes total sense because they've already got that sort of welcoming party. It's a safe and proven drop zone. in that sense. But not everything goes to plan. As happens, and of course, airborne forces are still relatively a new thing at this point. Dropping a Jeep from a plane still pretty serious. And this is one of the first living history photos at an event this year, showing one of our Jeeps, and we couldn't miss this opportunity with the Dakota flying over roughly 200 feet above us, which sort of helps paint the picture somewhat a little bit more. But when the Operation Hardy chaps are dropped in, 2 of the 3 Jeeps, Roman candle, as it's called in the war diary, and you have to use your mind's eye here. This is where the chutes just fail to open, so it comes slamming down to the ground. Now, this potentially could be a Hardy Jeep, but it's most likely a Hounsworth Jeep. For the chap in the centre with the MP40 across his chest is Lieutenant Ian Wellstead, who was on Operation Hounsworth, wrote 2 fantastic first-hand accounts, one from his time in France with the Maquis, and one for the crossing of the Rhine, where he was wounded. If you're looking for first-hand accounts of the SAS in France and Germany, I'd plug his books for certain. Absolutely fantastic. So we're going to roll on to a little bit of Operation Wallace now. So the photo on the left is a confirmed Operation Wallace photograph. This is directly from the war diary, and the chap on the left is Major Roy Farron, but we'll come back to him shortly. Now, the plan for Operation Wallace is pretty radical. This is the first time in France that they're going to mirror what the chaps were doing in North Africa. They're going to drive 20 Jeeps with 60 men, 375 miles across France. Now, the reason they're going to drive across France is that's a big force to drop by aircraft. There's a hell of a lot of risk to drop Jeeps, as we've already seen on Operation Hardy, sort of 66% failure rate of dropping. These Jeeps are specially modified. They're going to land at an airfield in France, and they're going to drive all the way down, utilising back roads, down to Châtillon-sur-Seine to link up with the Operation Hardy base. Now, Roy Farron, the chap on the right, he commanded Operation Wallace. He was 24 years old at the time of the operation. Need I say any more? And by this point in the war, he's been a prisoner of war twice, and he's escaped twice. He took on the name of Paddy McGinty, which is quite an interesting one when you see in the sort of the papers where they sort of say, oh, he awarded this medal or this rank, and he's listed as Paddy McGinty. The reason he had that name is he had a bit of a fondness, shall we say, for utilising explosives, which paraphrases the nursery rhyme Paddy McGinty, swallowing a load of explosives and so forth. So it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of joke in that sense. However, Operation Wallace. So this is where they're heading for. This is a bit of a blown-up map, really. So this is right on the German-Swiss Franco border in that sense. So you've got the Vosges mountain range, and you've got Belfort, which is just in the bottom right there. So that's the town that lends itself to that valley, the Belfort Gap. And that's where they're anticipating all these retreating enemy armour and soft-skinned vehicles, infantry, to be heading back to Germany. So that's where they're heading for. And the town in red, that's Châtillon-sur-Seine. We've mentioned a few times now. And I feel like my pronunciation's getting a little bit better each time.
Well, you don't be too good, otherwise you'll be too inauthentic. Living history. I mean, I'm sure most of the blokes in the SAS couldn't speak French either. You get the odd officers, so you don't want to be too good, otherwise it'll be inaccurate.
Fair point. Well made.
We had a question, by the way, about just for those who aren't familiar with it, what aircraft are used to drop Jeeps to the SAS?
Excellent. So you will see the Dakota is used for Operation Wallace to land them in. From memory, I think it's a short Sterling they were using for the Hardy drop.
Right.
But Halifaxes have been used as well. So
thank you.
Yes, but Operation Wallace, they're not dropping them; they're landing them, and they land them at Rennes. I think Rennes, is that correct? Rennes Airfield.
Yep, Rennes. Yep.
So they land on the 19th of August. So 18 planes land. 2 of them get waylaid along the way in bad weather, as always is the case. and 54 men land with them. So the plan is they're going to drive from Rennes Airfield pass through enemy lines all the way down to Châtillon-sur-Seine, skirting the south of Paris. And this was a photo opportunity at the Victory Show a few years ago, which we couldn't miss. We had the opportunity to put the Jeeps in front of Dakota. And it gave you a sense of the scale, because we were thinking, imagine slinging one of these Jeeps underneath one of those aircraft. It was quite amazing. So it gives you a sense of scale in that sense. Right, we'll have a look at some of the Jeep modifications now. So this is my Jeep, which I purchased a couple of years ago, and we've utilised a lot of the original drawings which were used by the Remy workshop, as well as drawing on Farron's observations in the report, and of course period photos as well. And we've got the typical cut down bumper at the front for airborne use, along with the SAS with the wing struts for a bit of reinforcement for when it's dropped. The signature slats cut out the grille, which everyone loves to tell us is for better cooling purposes. It's nothing to do with that. It's all about repairing the radiator nice and quick. And that's something that was carried over from the desert into Northwest Europe, really, at this point in the war, as a bit of sort of a regimental pride thing, really.
And while that's photos there, we're having questions about, someone asked earlier on about wearing SAS insignia on berets and the fact the vehicles are marked up. So Jim said, why have markings behind enemy lines?
It's a really good point. So on the bonnet, the Allied star is genuinely a lifesaver. As well, we won't spoil the story, but a chap later on, you'll find out, Lieutenant Pinsey paid the ultimate price for not being having his bonnet star on. So you've got almost total Allied air superiority at this point. They are running almost free reign over France, especially over the operational area these guys are going to be in. They're going to be crossing behind enemy lines. It's genuinely a lifesaver. And there is a couple of Jeeps that we've seen on photos that don't have this, but they're largely driving in convoy anyway. But yes, it's one question. I'm not sure if that's what the gentleman was asking, but one question we sometimes get is how do the regular army feel about you wearing SAS insignia now? We're really lucky. I can't say too much, but we're really lucky that the regiment support what we do, and they really appreciate what we do. And we've worked with them a couple of times now. So
my two cents is also that this is the era of, it was well past the commando order. You want to make sure that you're completely recognizable as serving British soldiers, right? Because if everyone's bombing around in civilian clothing and things like that, I know technically being in uniform does not make you exempt from the commando order, because you're still behind the lines. But the more you can look like an official British Army unit, theoretically, the better chance you've got of, if you're captured, of being treated as a POW.
Absolutely, and it also will prove a lifesaver for the local population in some of the French towns and villages as well, because if the Germans find out that it's the local Maquis who are carrying out attacks on the Germans, then it's very much a case they will take out reprisals on the townsfolk. Whereas if they know that it's uniformed Allied soldiers, they're less likely to do so. So it's arguably not a lifesaver for some of the actual soldiers who are taking part, but certainly for the local populace. But yeah, it's very fortunate that on Hardy and Wallace there isn't any executions. That's what they are, taken out against them. Obviously, Operation Gain and Ball Basket being the most two famous examples, but it happens. And yeah, the commando orders is very good to point that out.
Thank you.
You can also see on the Jeep here, it's absolutely bristling with weaponry, and this is based on one of the photos I'll be bringing up shortly. You can see those three Vickers K guns, all forward facing. Since added a rear gun as well, a Bren gun in the back, and the bazooka's a nice touch and a really great talking point, because we've seen a bazooka on a couple of photos from Operation Wallace, and it's Freddie Oakes, who's one of the signalmen on the operation. He wrote after the war that we essentially, words to the effect of, we were issued these bazookas, but we didn't know how to use them. We'd never been trained on them. And the kind of thought of having to learn how to use them and try and get the off your Jeep, well, there's no primary source evidence that they were actually used on the Up, but we know that they had them. We're all on to that next slide. So this is one of probably the most photos from Operation Wallace. This taken on the 22nd of August, memory serves me well, at a Burgundian farmhouse. It's a series of a number of photos taken that day. And this shows the Operation Wallace column at rest. And it really helped give us a really good source of inspiration for how we were going to not only modify the Jeeps, but also set dress them as well. If any of your viewers, I know you come to We Have Ways Fest, would it? The convoy scenario we do is very much, this inspires the sort of set dressing of the Jeeps to make it look as effective as possible. So yes, this has got some little interesting points on, but we won't go into the gubbins of that. Probably be here all night. Right. This is a photo from the same day, from the same location. And this really caught my eye because not only does the gentleman on the right, whose name does escape me, forgive me, he's in that photo from the beginning of the operation, at the beginning of the slides. The Jeep on the left has got no long-range tanks. It's only got single Vickers. It's not got the same modifications as the other Jeeps. And I thought there's a reason why. Now, when I started reading Ian Wellstead's With the Maquis and then going into the Bull Basket records, I discovered that Reg Seekins took his Jeep up to meet Farron and his convoy. And it was on the same date that this photo was taken. So we can almost categorically say, of course, we can never 100% say in history, but that 99% sure that's Reg's Jeep, which is pretty cool. But you can see the difference between the two Jeeps, which is also a good point. Hounsworth Jeep's pretty bare. He's only travelled sort of 50, 60 miles at this point, whereas those guys who have driven from Rennes and they're on the way down to Châtillon are absolutely laden to high heaven. But the journey from Rennes down towards Châtillon, they meet Paddy Mayne. I'm sure some people have heard of him. So
Paddy,
Paddy,
I think so. Yeah.
we won't get too obsessive with him, don't worry. I know some people like to go a bit over the top, but he pops up every now and then in these operations. And of course, Paddy Mayne's commander of one SAS, but he'd parachuted in with Fraser McCluskey onto the Hounsworth base. And what Mayne was basically doing was going from Hounsworth up to Gain and was working his way back up to Normandy. And he met with Farron en route. So Farron, of course, 2 SAS and Mayne 1 SAS. And I probably should have added the photo in of them when they're back in the UK at the end of the war, where you can see the height difference between the two guys. But there's clearly a lot of respect between the two. Certainly smooth operators, that's for sure. But they also stop just before Le Mans at Orléans, where they meet the American 4th Armored Division. And the Americans resupply them with rations and with supplies and ammunition and so forth, because a lot of the weapons and small arms the SAS chaps are using are American carbines and Colts and so forth. So they have quite an interesting route, and they use back roads, and it's you can almost imagine it's playing out. It's one of those things where you bloody typical, that is. So the rationale is we'll use back roads because the Germans won't be using them. It'll be nice and easy for us to traverse. We can cover as many miles as possible. They very quickly discovered that the Germans have exactly the same thought process. So they're staying off the main roads because they're being hounded by the Maquis. So they do inevitably cross paths along the route. And arguably the biggest sort of engagement en route to Châtillon, there's several of them, is at a place called Vienne-le-Prévost. I think that's correct. Hope it is. Anyway. And what happens there is Farron explains this really well in his audio interview, which is available on the IWM website. And he says that we rounded a corner, and he says he was foolishly driving at 30 miles an hour at the head of his column. And he comes around this corner and enters the village. And he's met at 20 yards distant by a German artillery piece, which is manned by men wearing Afrika Korps uniforms. And this artillery piece fires a round, which goes straight over his head. And Farron's driver swings the wheel, and they crash into into a ditch at the side of the road. And Farron's really miffed about this because the trailer catches fire that he's towing. And in the trailer is all his maps, which he manages to get the maps out. But the wireless set, the JED set, is destroyed, and he's really not happy. And he says, I foolishly, risked my life to save that radio set. But the biggest and most annoying part of that engagement was Farron had issued really strict orders to his Captain Lee, whose story we'll pick up at the end of this, which is incredible in itself. And then, confusingly, Lieutenant Lee as well. So Captain Lee's French, Lieutenant Lee is English. And Farron gives them both command of a number of jeeps, and they split the whole column into three parties, into three elements, and they leave a half-hour interval. Now, just before they get to Vienne, a place called Maquis, they are given some intelligence. Each party is given the same intelligence that there's Germans in the next village. And rather than changing their route or purposefully avoiding them, which is what Farron had rightfully ordered them to do, there's no point engaging. Our fight's not here. It's down at Belfort. That's where we want to be. And Captain Lee just completely ignores this, and he rides head on into Vienne, ignoring this intelligence, and is shot up, loses some of his jeeps, and is scattered. His column is pretty much decimated at this point. The same thing then happens to Farron. They run the risk of being encircled at one point, but they manage to get out. And then the third party at the back, Lieutenant Lee, runs into exactly the same issue as well. Now, as a result of that action, Farron, with the main core of the Wallace party, continues on this prearranged path down towards Châtillon, whereas Captain Lee, who links up with Lieutenant Lee's party, they don't head down towards Châtillon, which is something, of course, Farron doesn't know at this point. And they head down instead towards the Hounsworth base. So these 60 men and 20 jeeps rapidly become the Wallace party, that is, 7 jeeps and roughly 24 men, much to the annoyance of Farron. And here's a living history photo from WWII Fest last year, talking of that jeep trailer with the 22 setting. It's just taken on an old Kodak vest pocket. It's worth mentioning, if anyone is coming to WWII Fest, it's a fantastic event. You don't get that kind of living history circus you see at some other events, shall we say?
There's a very strict kind of invite basis, isn't it? It's that only the better groups go there, which is good. While you've got that living history photo up, we did have a question from Beige Thursday about the security issue of the SAS guys taking their own photos. I know in the book and other people's books there are some that are from the French, but a lot are from the guys themselves. So were they under orders not to take photos, or how did it work?
They certainly were not allowed to take photos, but these are sort of guys that just don't follow the rules. I think we know the kind of gist of the ilk of these guys. There's plenty of photos that fortunately do exist, and somewhat ironically, the Regiment Association share them on their social media on quite a regular basis now. But it's such an important resource. A lot of these photos that you see on operations will tend to be late war, more winter 44, early 45 onwards, Archway and so forth. But the photos from Wallace that were shown on the previous slides, some are actually taken not just by the men themselves, but some of the local population as well. And there's a few more photos to roll on. So we've got to remember that these are the first Allied soldiers that these townsfolk are seeing, and they quite rightfully think liberation. And Farron says it a number of times in his fantastic book Winged Dagger, where he says it in a nutshell. I'm surmising. So it's really quite bloody annoying that all these people are jumping on our jeeps, and there's this one story where this excited Frenchman jumps on his jeep, and Farron pulls his pistol out and sticks it in his ribs and basically says, "Do one." Which works, of course. So yeah, you can imagine that celebration, all the flowers being thrown and champagne being given and drunk, and people will be bringing their camera and roll of film out thinking, I want to capture this moment. It's our liberation, but little do they know that this is just a tiny little force, really. This isn't the liberation. It's going to be many weeks, or in some cases, months. We'll roll on to the next slide. Just another living history photo as well from WWII Fest while we were there. It sort of captures the sort of, I think it's lunchtime there by the look of it. Oh. Right, now this is an original photo, and this is one which is, I would say has come to light recently, but resurfaced again is probably the best way of saying it. And this purports to be from Avalon. Looking at this photo, we can see some members of the Maquis, but interestingly, and we'll draw attention to the Jeep. Now, this is by process of elimination, and the facts with the Jeep modifications that we can see, almost certainly a Jeep from Captain Lee's party after the engagement at Vienne. And this is Avalon's inching closer from Vienne down to Hounsworth, and it's mentioned that Avalon is where not only Captain Lee's party were, but also a gentleman called Carpendale as well as a signals officer. So by process of elimination, we're rightfully thinking this is going to be Captain Lee and his party. Now, another offshoot of the Wallace party was this gentleman here in the driver's seat. So this is Harold, or Tanky, Challoner. He got his nickname Tanky because he borrowed, shall we say, a Tanky's berry and wore that quite famously. He named his Jeep Little Tanky. There is another photo of Little Tanky in late war. I believe it's during Archway from memory. Now, this is at a place called, and you're going to have to bear with me here. Where are we? This is L'Isle-sur-Seine. So a little French town. Now, the story behind this is after the engagement at Vienne, a place called Viery-le-Belle-Fontaine. I should really learn French here. There was another engagement on Captain Lee's party, and they abandoned their Jeeps temporarily, and Tanky's crew the following morning went back to find their Jeeps, and they found their Jeep hidden and went to drive it and couldn't find any other members of Captain Lee's party. So they also thought, we're going to head towards the 1 SAS base 2. So they drive down, and it's quite amusing because Tanky recalls in his book, Tanky and the Meta, I believe it's called, fantastic book. And he says that the plan was, if we were going to encounter soft-skin vehicles, we'll brew them up, we'll destroy them. Whereas if we find sort of armoured vehicles or outnumbered, we're just going to drive past them and raise our arm in a Nazi salute. Which sounded quite funny when I read it at first, but I thought, do you know what? There's actually a large element of truth in that. You can believe it. And it's something you has popped up a few times with other SAS primary source accounts post-war as well. But there's a great story here, because when they enter L'Isle-sur-Seine, Tanky's crew are invited to dinner by the local population who was celebrating, throwing flowers and so forth. You can imagine the scene from Bridge Too Far or from Band of Brothers. We've all seen it. These local population are getting in the way, and you're like, really frustrating. But they make the decision to go and celebrate. And Tanky says that they decides enough, and they leave the fantastic buffet that they've put on for them and celebrations. They've drunk a lot of rum and wine and so forth. And Tanky says that he gave the order for his crew to mount the Jeep. Now, Tanky says that he was getting in on the passenger side, and he says it looked really smart until he got in, tripped over the twin gear lever sticks and fell out the other side, much to the amusement of the local French population. So with all this kind of, obviously horror of war going on and so forth, these guys are finding, amusement and really being welcomed by the local population. And this is another photo from the celebrations at the same village. And this shows, I love this photo because the way friend Haig is wearing the photo, wearing his beret in the centre is just exceptional. And what was really nice is a relative of a friend actually contacted me, having bought the book, and was amazed to see this photo. I think it was either a great grandfather or great uncle. It was a fairly close relation. And he says this was lovely to see and to read all about some of his wartime exploits. And of course, you got the local Maquis joining in those celebrations there. as well, which is
it's worth mentioning, referencing the fact that the way that the berets were worn back then, not just by the SAS but by everyone, was very different to the 1970s and 80s way that the British Army did it, very straight across. And this is the big droopy down, big overhanging crown right on. I mean, that's held on by Brill cream, that one, isn't it? I mean, it's or sweat sticking it to his head there. But that's how you see it, isn't it? These good. A jaunty angle doesn't even cover it. It's just that, perched on the side of your head.
It's top drawer swagger. And you'll see some of our guys in the group, we will admittedly purposely wear our berets like that, because it does trigger people. It's a really good talking point. Where people are like, sort your beret out. And you're like, oh, what's wrong with it? But you open up the conversation and people are like, that's really, really cool. And indeed, at WWII Fest last year, we talked about the caliber of groups. I'd also pass the fair comment about the caliber of visitors. The questions we get are fantastic.
Yeah.
When we're on the display, and the approach is always commendable. Where people, last year, a gentleman said to me, he said, "I've got to ask, why are you wearing your hat like that?" And the story came out, the photos came out, and then when the story got going, it turned out he was a relation of a guy who was on Operation Wallace. Joe Cunningham was his name, and he was a signalman on Wallace. And he said, I think he was in the SAS. I've got this photo of him. And I was like, I recognise him. And we were going through these photos really frantically. And I said, that's him there. That's actually straight from the war diary. And Joe Cunningham is also linked and mentioned in Freddie Oakes' memoir, and the two of them worked together. And we sat for a couple of hours talking, and we had a beer on the night. And this guy was just absolutely made of. This was a highlight of his weekend. So it just goes to show you never know who you're going to talk to at these kind of events.
I have to add JC's comment there. He's not wearing that beret. He's merely walking alongside it, which is excellent.
Yeah, I like that. It's Ali. Let's put it that way. It's dead cool. Yeah, and there's plenty of photos. I mean, it's not isolated to this either. I'm quite sad because I'm a member of a Facebook group that has a collection of hundreds, if not thousands now, of photos from the war of guys wearing berets or kit really in an odd fashion, and it's really good for research purposes. So
yeah,
it certainly helps. But yes, so the Wallace party, they journey down from Rennes, and they link up with the Hardy party on the 24th of August. They have that huge engagement of Vienne. Captain Lee's sort of party splits off and heads to Hounsworth, and not to be seen again. And just before Farron's party reaches Hibbert's party, that Wallace and Hardy parties link up. They have it's all about opportunity, as I mentioned at the start. Farron sees this goods train rolling into view, and he says, "We'll have a bit of that." And they open up at point blank range with their Vickers guns and destroy a goods train casually, as you do. And then they take out a German radar station as well on the same day. Although they do have a little bit of help from the Germans, who see these advancing Allied forces, panic, and start to blow things up. But it's on the operation report, so it counts. And another living history photo as well. This details. This is from our most recent events actually. This aid is really an aid to just show how the Maquis and the SAS work together. Now, talked about a lot of friction and mistrust between the SAS and the Maquis, and that's not ill-founded, because there is several occasions, not just on the way down from Rennes, but throughout the whole operation, as well as across the whole of France, where the SAS is shocked to the enemy. Farron even remarks that he has these two very dubious characters purporting to be Maquis speak to him and say, "Where are you going next?" and what's your plan? So he feeds them false information, of course, and sends them in a completely different direction to report to another Maquis. That phone call never happens, so he knows that they're agents. There's a lot of skullduggery going on here. But the plan, when Hardy and Wallace link up, the plan is they're going to do something at Châtillon-sur-Seine, which is where this fantastic Maquis has been organised, and it was identified by HQ SAS Brigade at the beginning of the year. It's just really the whole reason why they're heading down here. So on the 29th of August, Hibbert, Farron, and Lieutenant Morris, they, as you do, casually drive up the dried up riverbed in Châtillon-sur-Seine to within 100 yards of the SS garrison at the chateau there, and dismount their jeep, get a little bit closer and say, "Yeah, that's definitely got enemy troops in." we'll attack it tomorrow. So they go meet with a Captain Max, whose name pops up pretty frequently throughout the operation. And the plan is at dawn, they're going to rain 3-inch mortar bombs down on the chateau. Farron strategically places jeeps at all the crossroads and roads in and out of Châtillon. And Captain Max promises 500 men from his Maquis, so long as the SAS fuel their vehicles. So the SAS said, yeah, we'll fuel them, no problem. Get in nice and early tomorrow morning. So they have a good old knees up. The SAS go back to their camp in the Forêt de Châtillon. And at dawn, on the 30th of August, the signalman of Operation Wallace, a valuable asset, Farron doesn't want to risk them. They start raining 3-inch mortar bombs down on the chateau. The alarm goes up. Farron's positioned all these jeeps tactfully throughout the town, and all hell breaks loose. And reinforcements are brought in by vehicle, and the SAS run riot in the town. The Maquis don't materialise until midday. And it's a bit of a rolling battle, really. It starts and stops, and Farron comments that he has the closest call of his life, where he's forced to crawl in the furrow of a field whilst being shot at with a machine gun, manages to survive it. And the losses for the SAS are really interesting, because there was only one SAS trooper killed during the battle. Now, it was mentioned earlier by one of your listeners that very much a case of why they're wearing uniform behind lines. Well, this for the townsfolk of Châtillon is a good job those guys were, because Trooper Bill Holland is killed in the street. He's dragged by one of the Frenchmen in the town into a doorway to try and give him first aid. Unfortunately, he cops it. Holland's body is left in the street in Châtillon. The SAS, apart from Holland being killed, only suffered 2 jeeps damage. They come away. Now, Freddie Oakes, who's this signalman I've referenced a couple of times, he wrote a great first-hand account. He was going to be in the same rear gunner's seat as Holland would have been. So he's counting his lucky stars at this point. They leave Holland's body behind, and it's said that because of that, when the Germans find it, there's no reprisal taken out against the townsfolk. We're looking at 100 Germans are killed on this at this Battle of Châtillon, as it's called. So 1 trooper killed, 2 jeeps damaged, 100 Germans killed. Enemy reinforcements, when they begin to enter the town, are shot up by the very cleverly positioned jeeps on the crossroads. The motorcycle combination ends up in the river at one point. 9 trucks are destroyed. So it's a really good outcome. The biggest negative is, of course, that the SAS now have showed their hand. They are a hunted element in this sense. And we'll roll on a couple of living history photos here. So this is from a recent event. And that's Lewis, who's fairly new actually to living history, but has a cracking impression. Note the beret wearing.
Yeah.
But what Farron does now after Châtillon is he reorganises his column into 3 distinct parties. This is the memorial in Châtillon-sur-Seine that's dedicated to memory of Trooper William or Bill Holland. So he was the only fatality from the SAS party on the 30th of August, buried locally. Right, so at this point, after the Battle of Châtillon, Farron thinks, right, we can't all stick together. There's far too many of us, and the heat's been turned up a little bit. So they're still looking to get to the Balfour Gap at this point, miraculously enough. Now, this photo is quite an interesting one, because again, you can see another sand-coloured beret, and it's a bit of a myth that you don't ever see any sand-coloured berets in Northwest Europe unless you're Paddy Mayne, but that's another story. But you can see on here where they originally started off with 3 men per jeep. They're losing jeeps at a rapid rate, whether it's mechanical failure, that tends to be the main issue, or through enemy action. So they're starting to pile on the jeeps here at this point. Right. So the 3 distinct parties we have Operation Wallace continues under Farron's command, which heads on a southern route from Châtillon to continue to the Balfour Gap. Operation Hardy continues on the northern route under the command of Grant Hibbert. And then there's a third party, which is codenamed Operation Roby, and that's under the command of a Lieutenant Pinsey. Right, this is the original. This is the report map of those three operations. So the blue line to the north is the Hardy route, the continuation of Operation Hardy under Hibbert. The southern route is the Wallace route. That's the one in black, the southern route. Now we'll note that they don't actually end up at the Balfour Gap. They end up hunkering down in the forest. But we'll get to that shortly. They knew that the net was really tightening at this point, which was brilliant news for those advancing forces coming from the northwest, and the west, mainly the Americans. But for the SAS guys, it really wasn't pleasant business at all. Now, Farron notes down that it was the most unpleasant time and experience of his whole service, where he says that for 4 days and for 4 nights, less than 100 yards distance was the German 88 battery. And he says they had to hunker down in the woods, and they had to whisper to each other. They daren't make any noise, and the activity of enemy vehicles sort of passing by was they just weren't able to function. It would have been suicide to do so. They do venture out on foot. Farron does personally, and cut a railway line, which shows you that although they're up against it, they've still got a little bit left in them at this point. I would pass on to here. So these are a couple of photos which have again only resurfaced fairly recently by some sterling work of a friend of mine called Joe Bristol, who's very into his Maquis sort of history. So this is Captain Max in the sort of white coat on the left with the WWII Maquis. Now WWII only came into being as a Maquis at the beginning of September, I beg your pardon. And what they did is, bear in mind, they're not liberated at this point. The front line is still sort of roughly 20, 30 miles to the west at this moment in time. They encircle the town of WWII, and they build sort of makeshift defences around the town, and they garrison it as a Maquis force. Now, this is certainly an SAS Jeep. We believe that this is an Operation Hardy Jeep. And the reason we believe that is we know that Hibbert and his Operation Hardy party worked with the WWII Maquis in early September, and they went back to a place called Foulin, where there was a huge petrol dump. And together, bearing in mind that Hibbert had signalled this back to the RAF, back to England for the RAF to act on, to say, come and destroy this huge petrol dump. They didn't act on it. So Hibbert, along with the WWII Maquis, join forces, and they go and destroy 100,000 gallons of petrol, whilst also helping themselves to 1,000 gallons of petrol for the vehicles and the French vehicles as well. So that's one of the standout results of the whole operation. The resultant explosion is witnessed by the Americans to the northwest, some sort of roughly 25 miles distant at that point, which is pretty incredible. Now, there's quite a lot of personal stories in here, and if I went through them all, not only would there be no point behind the book, but also we'd be here all night. But the one that I've cherry-picked for this is Lieutenant Gurney. So picture on the left is him from that Burgundian farmyard back in late August. And then the photo on the right is before he went out on the operation. So he was 26 years old, originally joined the Royal Norfolks the day before war broke out in 39, of course. He served with number 7 Commando in the Middle East, and he joins 2 SAS in July 44. So this is his first operation with the SAS, although he's seen a lot of service at this point. Now, Tanky, after he got really drunk in that French town, is the easiest way of saying it, and fell across the other side of the Jeep. He links up with Captain Lee's party, and they end up sort of manoeuvring their way down to the Hounsworth base. Now, Gurney, along with Tanky, so Tanky parachutes back in after he ends up back in Blighty. He's parachuted back out and links up with with the Wallace and Hardy sort of remnants post Chatillon. Gurney's with them. Now, there's a series of ambushes that play out all the way through the whole journey down to Chatillon and beyond. Obviously, we're not covering them all tonight. But one such ambush is where Lieutenant Gurney sets an ambush up for this German convoy that rolls into view at night. And it's described as a huge prehistoric monster of a truck that's leading the column. So they let it roll into view, let it get a little bit closer, and they open up with the twin Vickers, which of course is packed full of incendiary rounds and armor-piercing ball, etc., etc. This prehistoric monster of a truck explodes, and it explodes with such force that it blows Tanky out of the Jeep. He's temporarily blinded in one eye. As a piece of shrapnel hit his eye, and all he can see is blood. And he knows, of course, he got to safety, but he never really knew how or what happened. Now, one of the men who was watching this unfold was Freddie Oakes, and he told two really interesting stories about this. One is that Gurney, pictured here, he pulled Tanky from the wreckage and was dragging him across the road when Gurney, and back to safety, when Gurney was shot in the back and was killed almost instantly. Now, what Freddie Oakes also says on the night time is that he sees Trooper Moody. You got to bear in mind, he's almost sort of painted the picture in the sort of glow of this burning vehicle and by the moonlight, you know. He sees this German soldier on horseback, like the silhouette, and this Trooper Moody pulls out his Colt and he fires it, and he just sees this German soldier slump off his horse, and he and a quote said, "I recall how Trooper Moody pulled his Colt and shot a German on horseback in the moonlight, just like a Western film." And you just think, you know, what these guys went through and the way that they view it is surreal sometimes.
Yeah,
you know, this is
definitely
crazy. And that plays out across whether it's the SAS or, you know, whatever of a regiment. It's all the same. It's a good, you know, probably the most positive way of looking at it, should we say? But Gurney's story is just one of those cherry-picked sort of tragedies, really, that played out on these operations. I won't try and pronounce that place name either. It looks a bit too technical.
No worries. Don't worry.
We'll move on.
No one will care. Don't worry. Yeah.
So a couple of photos I wanted to just bring up. So this is part of our ambush. So we took a lot of inspiration from the war diary and his personal first-hand accounts of the amount of engagements that they had on these operations. It was almost a daily thing. It was just normal, which is, you know, crazy to say and even believe. But when we started putting our living history impression together for, so we like to have as immersive scenarios as we can achieve, really, without explosions and nasty things happening. We thought, well, we've got some great German vehicles, and let's make it look like a convoy's being attacked. And we took a lot of inspiration from Gurney's sort of story there. And we do have a much bigger truck coming this year as well, although it's not a prehistoric monster, but it certainly helps paint that picture a little bit clearer. So anyone who's going to, I think it's the Arsenal tent that's in the woods, right? Research me well.
While that picture is up of a dead, or a replica dead German, yeah. Phil Blood, who I'm seeing 2 days' time, asked you, what did the SAS do with German POWs, if any were taken?
Very much a case of, and it's practical and pragmatic, shall we say. On this operation specifically, if they took prisoners, they would make it the Maquis problem, and making it the Maquis
pass
problem.
The buck. I like that. Yeah,
it's a delegation. You know, it's the first rule of management. But unfortunately, passing the buck in that case would mean almost certain death right. for any Germans, especially if they were Russian. The French didn't like them, to say the least. But yeah, in some cases, it'll be a case of disappear in that direction, or if the Maquis are nearby. I mean, they don't have we're going to sound like Bridge Too Far, the facility to take them prisoners. Yeah, and they just don't. You know, it's going to hinder them. So same with wounded. If the SAS guys, you know, when they had wounded men, they left them with the Maquis, with the local population to deal with, because they just slowed them down. They couldn't care for them.
And I was impressed with, in reading your book, how well organized some of the resistance or the Maquis hospitals were. I mean, they weren't just, you know, putting plasters on in the woods. They had really fairly good facilities. I was really quite impressed.
Yeah, it's always a case of the French in 44, 45. They always get this real bad press. It's got to be down to hello. It's almost certainly. But they were don't get me wrong, in some places they were absolutely atrocious. The Maquis was awful, to say the least. They just weren't organised, as we found out at Châtillon to a degree. But in some places, WWII, as just a sort of geographical go-to example, they were really well organised and they were really effective as well. And they were arguably at their best when they were being supplied by the Allies and working with Allied forces such as the SAS at Foulon. I mean, wiping out 100,000 gallons worth of petrol definitely helps the war effort. I mean, the Germans were struggling supplying and fueling their vehicles anyway by sort of September 44, but that's definitely going to be playing a huge part, that's for sure. But some of the results that they had some great results along the way to the sort of end result, if you will. The SS were, as they always are, very keen to get their hands on the SAS after what happened at Châtillon. And there's this one story that Farron paints a picture of where he says we were encircled by the SS, we couldn't get out, and he said it was like a mechanized Custer's last stand, which I thought was a great way of saying it. Really cool. Just imagine these jeeps fanned out in circle. But he spied this gap in the woods and managed to drive his jeeps through. And even though they're facing like upwards of 1,000 SS here with vehicles and armored vehicles, etc., he has the foresight to say to one of his sort of junior officers, right, take 2 jeeps, go around the back and see what work you can do. And they end up killing an SS colonel and some of the high-ranking officers and blowing some staff cars up as well, which I just find absolutely brilliant. You love it. So it's
and it proves, Steve, that if there's that number of SS troops trying to find you, you're damaging the German war machine. As you said, there are various Maquis groups and indeed some Allied special forces operations that, through various reasons, don't have much success. Things go wrong, misdrops, etc. These are actually causing some hassle. They are the fuel that you mentioned earlier. So the fact that there's marauding SS trying to stop these guys is proof of the fact it's working. Alas.
Absolutely. I mean, these are arguably some of the finest German troops that could certainly be utilised somewhere else on the front. But instead, they're looking for roughly 40 guys at this point and sort of 10 vehicles, really, which just proves the point that you've got those sort of numbers in the field and you're tying down 1,000, 2,000 troops. It's genius, really. Brilliant. Ingenious, if you will. We'll roll on to the next slide. So we mentioned a gentleman called Lieutenant Pincey and Operation Roby. So Operation Roby was one of the 3 offshoots post-Battle of Châtillon. Now, Operation Roby, whereas Wallace and Hardy were going to continue with jeeps, Roby was going to be a foot operation. So they were going to stay in the local sort of area of Châtillon-Langres and undertake as much work as they could under the command of Pincey. Now, Pincey is a gentleman on the left here. And someone asked a question about identification on vehicles. Well, I think what probably answers the question best is what happened to Pincey. Now, he was given, we don't know, 3 vehicles from the Maquis, we believe, because Colonel Claude was not very impressed that he had these vehicles. And what Pincey would do is he would drive up to Paris in a civilian car and civilian clothing. Why, we don't really know. That's what the sources say. What he was doing, driving that distance, not too sure. But we know he took the journey. Now, on the way back one evening, he was shot at, and this was witnessed by the Maquis, was shot at by an Allied fighter and killed. He was driving his civilian vehicle and he had no bonnet sort of identification star on the vehicle at all. And this was recorded by the Maquis. The local mayor also wrote post-war sort of what happened to him. And one of the SAS officers also regurgitated it into a report as well. But Pincey unfortunately was killed, but Operation Roby did carry on. They scored a couple of successes, but by mid-September, they were called back, as were indeed Wallace and Hardy, called back to make their way back to Allied lines and to be repatriated back to the UK, ready for operations in northern Italy, and then of course into Germany. But I always put myself trying to get my sort of headspace into what these guys were going for, like Operation Wallace continuation. Those 4 days and nights they spent just lying down on the floor, the forest floor, just about whispering to each other. There's a great story where one of the SAS chaps, he's told to go. I think it's Tanky from memory. He's Tanky. He's told to go and blow some railway line up, and Farron says, "Take this guy with you." And Tanky says, "Why would I take that guy with me? Like, he can't be quiet." He's like, he's just exploded a tin of corned beef on the fire. He says, "We're supposed to be quiet," and this guy would be absolutely useless in this situation. But they do reach salvation in the end. So talk about how organised the French are. Obviously, it's their back door, back sort of garden in that sense. And they meet up with the Americans. And the Americans come in and sort of locate the SAS groups in the forest. And at first, the Yanks are a bit like, don't really believe you. Like, how long have you been operating behind lines? What have you actually been doing? Because they don't know that these guys are doing what they're doing. So they have to prove who they are. But very quickly, they get to the bottom of it, and they sort of head back, and they go back via Paris, spend all their money that they're given, that they take on the operation, have a right good knees up, and they're repatriated via Arromanches back to Britain. But the very last, I think it's on. I'll just double back here. This isn't a photo that's only come to light very recently. We believe the guy on the right is Lieutenant Pinsey by process of elimination. We can't entirely prove that just now, but it just proves that the research is ongoing. And what plays into it is he looks very similar. He's got the glasses, the moustache, but he's also got no bonnet star on that vehicle, and that's a civilian vehicle. So could it be? We don't know. But we know that that's Captain Max there on the left. So it could well be. And the very last element of Operation Wallace, Hardy or Roby that came back through the lines was this gentleman who has his own story, which we haven't covered here, but it's in the book. And this is the gentleman in the driver's seat. So this is Lieutenant Carpendale, or Chips Carpendale, as he's called. And he shows him the day he passed back through the lines in late September. Note the gentleman in the passenger seat, not only for his beret, but for the beard he's sporting as well. And Chips is last back through the lines, essentially, because he has damage to his sump on his Jeep. So he cracks his sump on a rock, and it proves how effective the RAF resupply was, because they get on the old radio and say, we need a new sump. The RAF drop it in the following day. And you see that where those Jeeps that are towing the trailers, which have been hammered on the clutch, they'll radio through and say, we need a new clutch. They get it the following day. But of course, the issue they have is they don't have the mechanical mind to fix this, or the knowledge or know-how. This is where the local French mechanics step in and do the work for them, which is quite cool. That's one of my favourite photos from the operation. Yeah. It's a dead cool. And note the American military policeman there as well. Probably saying, who are you and what you're doing?
Yeah. Trying to think how many regulations he can catch them out on.
Yeah, probably so. But it's a really cool photo because it just shows you how they carried the whole world on that Jeep. Yeah. And as much as we'll try as living historians to live off a Jeep, we'll never get it the same. But we'll always try our best, to do the right thing for these guys and tell their story. But this is the scores on the doors of the Operation Hardy, Wallace and Roby collective, if you will. So 500 enemy personnel killed or wounded, 100,000 gallons of petrol as mentioned, the goods train, 23 staff cars, 6 motorcycle combinations, 36 miscellaneous vehicles, the radar station, the railway line severed. It's for the return of roughly 120 men who were engaged and upwards of sort of 25 Jeeps total. That's some result, and it proves just how effective highly trained men operating behind the lines, doing the right thing, what they can achieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's that photo on the left is from Operation Archway, actually, but that's then Major Grant Hibbert. But on Hardy, he was, of course, Captain Hibbert. Fairly elusive character. It's mentioned that he never attended any of the regimental reunions, but we have found some mention of him post-war where he retains the honorary rank of major. He passed away in the 70s. Don't really know much about what he did post-war, which is fairly standard, really. It's normal for these kind of guys. And there's that. I don't know why I've put it on there, but there's a photo of Chips Carpendale. I told you I liked it as well. But there's another quote that I will just mention. So we had one to kick off with, and here's another. This is from HQ SAS Brigade, and it says, "This must rank as one of the most successful actions ever carried out by a small harassing force behind enemy lines." Straight from Brigadier MacLeod, nonetheless. I'll roll on to the next slide because this is there's just three of the characters here that we're going to talk about. So on the left, we've mentioned Hibbert already. He was awarded a Distinguished Service Order for his role in Operation Hardy. Farron always spoke very highly of him, both in his book and in his audio interviews, essentially saying that he was a very good organizer, probably in modern management terms, an enabler, if you will. He was ideal for stockpiling those, finding the camp and getting the whole thing organized and supplied in anticipation of Wallace coming. Farron on the right, will jump to him. So as mentioned, he was only 24 years old at the time when he commanded Operation Wallace, which I'll never stop smiling at because it's frankly unbelievable. So he already had an MC, Military Cross, with 2 bars by the start of Operation Wallace. He was also awarded a Distinguished Service Order for his role in Operation Wallace. He went on to take part in Operation Tombola, and also the liberation of Norway as well. I'm not going to mention his post-war career because that is arguably a presentation on its own. Yeah,
you'd be here all night. Yeah.
But it's worth having a little bit more further reading about him. There was an assassination attempt on his life. There's a little bit of a hook for you.
Yeah.
But the chap in the centre is probably, we'll come back to Farron in a moment because I want to close the quote from him. But the chap in the centre is probably the most mysterious and unusual character I think I've ever come across, bar Paddy Mayne, of course, in the SAS history. So this is Captain Lee that we've spoken about. Jack William Lee is the name he used, but that wasn't his real name. His name was Ramon Courard. He was a French national, and he, pre-war, was in the French Foreign Legion. And I've had to write this down because I wouldn't be able to reel this off. At the start of the war, he became a prisoner of war, escaped via Spain to the UK. He took part in actions at the action at Narvik. He was the only Frenchman to take part in Operation Chariot. He also took part in Operation Loco, which is the subject of Damien's recent book, of course. Operation Slapstick. He commanded Operation Gaff, which is of course, the assassination attempt of Rommel. That was only a couple of weeks before Operation Wallace as well, which is even more amazing. However, his actions in France under Farron they ended his career in the British Army. There's a hell of a lot more to his story. There is a book coming out on him soon, and the author's name slipped my mind. But go and find the story of Ramon Courard or Jack William Lee. Really, really interesting character. He joined the French Army General Staff post-war and passed away in the 70s. But a really unusual character to say the least. But what's
it's Paul Johnson doing the book. Yeah.
Oh, it's Paul Johnson. Yes, that's
Well, he's a World War II regular. I'll get him to come on and do it then. Brilliant.
I will be tuning in for that. Yeah, it looks brilliant, and from everything I've seen pre-order wise, it looks like he's done it justice. But
in fact, I've already got the PowerPoint. He sent me the PowerPoint ages ago, and we just haven't set a date for it. So I'll make a note to message him.
Oh, superb! Yeah, that will be a marvelous one to see. But what always got me is when I started researching this, it wasn't going to be a book. It was just going to be information for the group to use.
Yeah.
And it's always stuck with me whenever I do sort of talk on this or doing this tonight, is the words always stick in my mind, what Farron said on his interview. And he bemoaned the fact that 2 SAS had just been largely forgotten and never had their story told. And he said that they had great success in France, and he was really unhappy that historians had never done him and his boys justice. So hopefully we've done him justice tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff. And you just got the slide with the book to go, I think, haven't you, the last one?
Oh, yes. And
there we are. And I'll hold up my copy there as well. I say links to getting it are in the description below. But yeah, brilliant stuff, Steve, as I knew it would be. We had a couple of questions. Some were being asked by Joe, your Maquis expert, JC. Joe is in the sidebar answering questions. That's why there weren't that many for you, because he was doing the job in the sidebar. Oh. But K8 asked earlier on about how closely did they cooperate with the RAF's Mosquito squadrons. I've heard that calling in Mosquito strikes was a core objective. I mean, I don't believe it was part of this operation, but that was something that you mentioned, the fact they have air superiority and that they are able to call on a certain amount of air support in some ops, aren't they?
Certainly are. As you mentioned, in Wallace and Hardy, there's no evidence of specifically mosquitoes being utilised, although Hardy did, and it's in the back of the book as an appendix, that all the intelligence that was reported back, almost all of it, none of it was acted on. But mosquitoes were called in and used to great effect by the SAS, probably most notably by Operation Ball Basket is probably the go-to example. Yeah. Where the camp was, they were shot to the enemy, the camp was bumped, and they got their retribution by calling a Mosquito squadron in to bomb the SS headquarters, not once but twice, if memory serves me well.
Thank you. And I've got a couple of questions. The one is, and I don't want to go down a massive, great rogue heroes rabbit hole, but by 44, the SAS is a proper British Army regiment, in some ways seen as the same way as, the Royal Norfolks or the Sussex Regiment. Is that sort of professionalism sometimes a little bit lost in the kind of the renegade kind of because the originals back in the desert in 42, 41, 42, they paved the way for what became later, but not necessarily that the SAS evolved from that, is what I'm saying. And I think, do you think that kind of professionalism, although they wear the berets at the jaunty angles, they are absolutely going there on under orders? Yes, there's an opportunist element to it, but do you think that professionalism is a bit sort of lost sometimes?
I would certainly agree. Rogue heroes, I don't like mentioning it, but it's certainly not done the chaps any favours at all. But by this point in the war in 44, they're a brigade. They are there were the four regiments and technically a battalion or company, if you will, with the Belgian company. They have their own brigadier. They're very well organised. They have a huge influx of recruits from the completely secret at this point auxiliary units, highly trained guys. And I would argue that when it comes to professionalism, well, the nature of their role, they could be taken either way, should we say. I mean, they're very good at what they do and what they're intended to do, so they're professional in that manner. But that when viewed through the sort of warped lens of a regular soldier, probably not so much, should we say, which is a fair comment. But they've certainly come a long way from L detachment in 41 to this point in 44, where they're getting some pretty Gucci kit. Rather than having to nick their camp equipment, they're getting regular drops whenever they want them and exactly what they want within 24 hours. So they've certainly come a long way in those 3 years. There's less than 3 years.
And then my next comment is actually a comment rather than a question. It's the fact that you said it rather kind of a blasé way, that you make sure the guys in the parachutistes have this information about the history. But I wish I could say that was actually common among living history groups, and it isn't as common as you think it would be. Most groups have that one history nerd who is the guy or the girl that everybody else turns to for. So what was the unit doing on this date? But I've met a lot of people, and I know I'm in Normandy. It's the mecca for the crappy reenactors. But I've met a lot of people who don't know their arse from their elbow in terms of what their unit was doing. And he said, what are you doing here? Your lot were over there. And they go, were we? And they know about the gear. They can display the jackets, but they don't actually know the operational history. So I'm glad that Les Parachutistes, and there's people among you that I've known for years, and Monty's men and Greg Hall and Pete Marshall. I've known them for decades. But I like the fact you've got that dedication to making sure that if you're putting a uniform on, you understand not just the gear, but that you understand the operations behind it. And leading on from that, because you wear the gear, because you're out there in the Jeeps and stuff like that, is there one thing that you and your mates have kind of learned from that you think gives you a window into what these guys did? Now, I'm not going to put, none of us are going to pretend that wearing a uniform at an event in 2026 is anything like actually being in Operation Wallace, but that playing around isn't the right word, but living with this type of gear and vehicles, has there been one thing that you learned from that you go, yeah, that's the thing that has impressed me?
I just think it's priceless knowledge. I always call it experimental archaeology, these sort of things. Like Monty's Men, when you've done that, until you go and use the equipment for real, whether it's a 24-hour ration pack or you go and drive a vehicle like the modified Jeeps we've got with 3 guys in with all the weapons and kit, and how that handles, what it's like driving it off-road. You'll never know exactly what it was like, nor would I want to. Terrified me, to be quite honest. But it gives you certainly a lot more experience. That experimental archaeology is worth its weight in gold, and it's been really valuable when it's come to interpreting like primary sources, photographs. You just have such a keener eye for kit and equipment. Yeah. And just to double back, you mentioned some of the guys in Les Parachutists. We're a really unique group. I mean, there is 2. This is a can of worms, but I'll briefly touch on it. There's 2 strands. There's reenactment. There's living history. 2 very different things. Some groups are just not worth mentioning, but we won't go there. Some groups, especially like the ones you'll see at We Have Ways Fest, great knowledge, great understanding of the kit. We're really lucky because whereas some groups, as you mentioned, which have 1 history nerd, we probably have 5 or 6. It's a really unique group of people, and we're always hungry for more. And it's that progressive mindset and attitude to sort of always strive to find out more. And Joe in the comments, I haven't been watching the comments, admittedly, I'll be too distracted.
Come back and do it next time when you watch again. But yeah.
But that work continues, and maybe from someone watching this, they'll go, I think I've got a photo somewhere that looks similar to that. And, the research carries on and it continues again. So,
and that's why, although I can be seen as a bit, negative about reenactment, I'm not negative about the concept of living history reenactment, because when done well, it does something very, very well. And I think this is the way of the different threads, the different ways of sharing history coming together. You've got your people sitting in archives going through documents. You've got people who are out there tracing the routes on the ground and understanding the roads, the terrain. You've other people looking at the gear, looking at and it all comes together to provide a bigger picture. And I said to you before going live, and this is going to benefit the viewers, is that you casually mentioned in the book how many miles they're covering in Jeeps on these sort of forest tracks, and people reading that were thinking about, I don't know, maybe making a modern journey in a modern car with modern shock absorbers and suspension across a lovely highway across Jeeps on forest tracks at sort of speed. You're going to feel every single bump and wobble on your body. Okay, these guys were young. He said Farron was 24, but just that. I mean, I've been in Jeep rides where you get out at the end of it and your leg just doesn't work. You've been sitting there with your knees up and you get out and you put your foot on the ground and your leg just doesn't work for a few seconds. You go, oh, my leg's gone to sleep. And that's that. I mean, I'm not saying I know what it was like to be in the war, but I know a little bit about what it was to be in a Jeep. And I think that's it. We had a question from Phil Blood again. Do you remember of any SAS POWs who died in Nazi camps? Because there was that famous thing at Belsen, wasn't the SAS team that turned up there in 45 to rescue one of their own. Is that a thread you particularly dived into, the SAS guys who end up in some of the nastier places of internment?
It's not a rabbit hole we've gone down, especially with Hardy and Wallace. I mean, the only sort of POW was very incredibly temporary, in the sense that he was only under arrest for about 5 minutes before the German fell into a stream, and he made a run for it. But what really interests me is the War Crimes Investigation Unit, which is a current research target at the moment. But in terms of these operations, I were very lucky that none of the chaps on these ops were actually arrested or put into captivity or fell foul of the commando order. thankfully. But of course, many of the other operations that took place, specifically in France, of course, and beyond, those guys didn't have a pleasant time, to say the least.
British muzzleloader, this will be the last question, is saying, it's sort of what I asked, but slightly differently. In your living history journey, what has surprised you the most in relation to your SAS studies? That's a good one.
It is, and what a fantastic channel as well. I love muzzleloaders, fantastic. In fact, Napoleonic was one of my first eras, and I remember watching a lot of those videos. What has surprised me the most? I think this is probably going to be one of those sort of, what a boring answer, but the willingness for people like Tony Rushmer, that being one, Damien Lewis, these famous authors, or I've read their books and think, oh, that's fantastic. Yes, they've certainly inspired me, but their willingness to engage has really surprised me. It's not like there's no gatekeeping of this information, which you see quite a lot in history circles. They've been really supportive, and that's really pleasantly surprised me. It's also specific to the research, surprised me just how much material there actually is about the wartime SAS, specifically to SAS, who really have been given a hard time of it in terms of, historians seem to, by and large, have just focused on one SAS, which you can kind of understand. But to see two SAS getting a little bit of love is quite a nice. So, yeah.
Well, you've certainly given them a little bit of love. So, well, fantastic stuff. Again, I'll hold up my copy of the book. It's a nice, easy read. I did it in a couple of days on holiday, and it fills in the details superbly from what you've said to us today. So there we are. I can't wait for our paths to cross again. And it's been great talking to you, Steve. And I'm back in about a week, folks. I'm doing the YouTube show with Eddie and Joe tomorrow, but I'm not back till the 7th, and that's when Jenny Chan is on talking about Unit 731. So we're back into the atrocities of World War II again. Not particularly pleasant, but important history. As always, click like and subscribe, buy my guests' books, read their blogs, go and see their displays at the famous World War II events, etc., etc. I will see you all next time. Cheers, Steve. Cheers, viewers. Bye.